Department Administration. We'll have a staff overview by Stephen Moo, KLRD. Stephen, welcome committee.
Good morning, committee. Stephen Wu, Legislative Research. Before I get started, would like to point out that we have the Secretary of Administration, Director of the Budget with us in the audience today, Adam Proffitt, as well as some the Deputy Secretaries of Management and Operations, Frank Burnham and Craig Knowlton. So I'm going to defer a lot of specific agency operation questions and responses to them. I'm just going to give a brief landscape of what the agency's budget is like. So just for some reference documents, the budget summary, this will be in volume 1, page 124. I'll also be referencing some adjustments in the screen shorthand here. It'll be reflected on page 4. So just as a general overview, the Department of Administration's primary role is to provide central services for state agencies. This includes facilities maintenance, personnel services, and so on. There are several unique characteristics of this budget. The first is that it includes both on and off budget expenditures. You'll see these reflected on the front page of that budget summary. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm only going to highlight some on-budget expenditures unless I specifically state otherwise. The second unique characteristic for this agency is that it includes 2 independent entities within it. It includes the Division of the Budget and the Office of Public Advocates. These entities are included within Department of Administration for budgetary purposes, but they are otherwise functionally independent entities. One additional thing is that the Department of Administration also pays the debt on a number of statewide statewide obligations. I know that debt service has been a recurring topic for some members of this committee. You can see the debt that the department pays on the front page, on page 124. That capital budget and debt line, about a third of the way down the page, you see the debt service principal and interest. There's also some more information in the back of the document, and that goes into more specifics. Just jumping into 25, you'll find this on page 126 of this budget summary. So for fiscal year 25, the legislature approved about $216 million, including $168 million SGF, about $38 million of SGF carried over from 24 into 25. The agency requests about $239 million in all funds. This includes about $168 million in SGF. This is a bit more than the amount approved by the legislature, about $22 million, and a bit more SGF than the amount approved, about $466,000. This is due to the number of items that you'll see on that table in the middle of the page. I'm only going to highlight a number of these since there have been a number of actions taken between the Legislative Budget Committee as well as the House recommendations. I'm just going to hit a couple of these items on this table. The first item I'd like to hit is number 1, the SGF reappropriations. So in total, there was about $38 million SGF that carried over from 24 and 25. As members of this committee are aware, the Legislative Budget Committee removed a lot of those reappropriations. The House then restored a number of those reappropriations. So those are detailed on the bottom of page 126 into 127. Of that list, you can cross-reference on page 4 of this green document for the items that were added back in. This includes that $7 million to create a license verification system pursuant to Senate Bill 66. I think it's been 2 years ago at this point. $500,000 for, $500,000 for security grants for Jewish Centers of Faith, about $321,000 for operations within Division of Budget, and $400,000 for the Office of Public Advocates. Of note for the Office of Public Advocates, about a third of this was transferred over to the Office of the Child Advocate, which became an independent state agency in 26. So that's it for the reappropriations. I'm now going to move on to number 2, this mail scanning equipment item. This is $400,000 of SGF. This is the same as the enhancement request from last session. This is for mail scanning equipment and facility. This is just to backfill the agency for it. As I understand it, the agency has already completed construction of this. This is to scan incoming mail in response to that white powder event from a couple of years ago. Item number 3 relates to the docking state office building. These are additional expenditures and appropriations for docking. For the House's recommendation, the House added language that required expenditures from the ARPA State Relief Fund specifically to complete the renovation of the docking state office building in fiscal year 25, contingent on renaming the building to the Robert J. Dole State Office Building. You can see a table of overall planned expenditures by year on page 128. So that item is still in, albeit with some adjustments to it. In fiscal year 25 still, the other item I'd like to point you to is number 5 on the table on 126, and the explanation you can find on the bottom of page, let's see, 129. It's that Office of Procurement and Contracts, staffing and offices. The agency request includes an increase of about 1.3 million in 9 FTE positions to address some staffing issues within the Office of Procurement and Contracts. The agency indicates that there's been a lot of staff turnover over the years, and this is to address that. The Legislative Budget Committee removed the funding for those positions, as well as both the funding and the FTE for those positions. The House concurred with that, so those items are currently not in the bill. In conversations with the agency afterward, they have indicated that the agency as a whole, this shifting in personnel is the result of shifting in personnel within the agency as a whole. And in terms of total FTE positions throughout the agency, they've only increased by 1 in off-budget FTE. You can see this reflected year over year. The agency has indicated to us that these additional positions are necessary for the continued functions and operations of this procurement office. They have faced enough staffing challenges that they have shifted resources to fill this need within the agency. For fiscal year 26, you can see this on page 132. So for fiscal year 26, the agency requests about 191 million. About 147 million of this comes from the general fund. This is a bit more than the amount approved, about 14 million, and a bit more SGF than the amount approved, about 17 million. This is due to 2 enhancement requests, ERP modernization and the docking personnel. There are 2 enhancement requests included. The lion's share of the increase is for this ERP modernization. This is an ERP refers to an enterprise resource management software. This is software that handles a number of business operations, from personnel to procurement to budgeting. The department currently uses OracleSoft PeopleSoft ERP to provide its services. This primarily refers to the Smart and Sharp systems, as well as the IBAR system. These systems are at least a couple decades old at this point, and the agency is looking to contract out for the modernization of this. They've indicated that the total project cost would be about $90 to $100 million. The $26 million you see in their request is for the first year of that payment. The Legislative Budget Committee, in terms of process, they removed the funding for this out of the golden motion, remove all funding for enhancements. The House added that funding back in, but from the ARPA State Relief Fund to begin this first year conversion. Let me see. You'll also see the procurement contracts, staffing and offices. Item in 26, the House added $400,000 back from the amount it deleted. It deleted about $891,000. The House ultimately added back that $400,000 in 26. Let's see. I think that about wraps it up for 26. There is one last additional item I'd like to indicate, I'd like to point your attention towards. I believe you have a yellow sheet of the governor's, the differences in the governor's recommendation. You'll see an item in there titled Series 2025A Bonds. That item is currently within the budget as it passed through the House. This is a consolidation of 3 different debt obligations into the Department of Administration. So it includes the Department of Corrections, Topeka Central Health and Behavioral Health Support Building, the Kansas State University Pure Imagination Facility, and the KBI Forensic Lab in Pittsburgh. This is just a consolidation of that debt into the Department of Administration. So moving forward, should the bond be issued, the D of A would be paying the debt obligations for these bonds instead of those 3 entities separately. The net result of this is that throughout the state, throughout the budget, we'll see an overall reduction in expenditures in 25 because those debts aren't being paid in 25. Instead, we'll see that debt start coming in 26 moving forward. I think that wraps it up for me. Happy to answer any questions. My apologies. One last thing I'd like to point the committee's attention to is if you have some questions on capital improvements and debt, you can find that in the back of this summary. I think it's on page 136 for capital improvements and page 139 for debt service. There's a lot of information in here. It's all rather dense. We'd be happy to answer questions both here or offline at any point.
Thank you, Stephen. Questions? Senator Petty.
So, Stephen, if you could just clarify, so if I'm looking on the green sheet, and under the Department of Administration in 25, so those, which of those items now are no longer in the budget?
Excuse me, Senator, are you referring to the motion, Senator Clay's motion from, so items listed with, or let me see. Any item for ARPA interest would be removed. So it is for the Department of Administration, nothing in 25. You'll instead see it in 26 with that ERP modernization.
What about the docking state?
Oh, yes, the 19 million appropriated for docking in 25. My apologies. So that the 19 million itself won't be reflected in here since it was requested from ARPA General. So there's overall, the money was in there to begin with. That didn't change. What did now change is the removal of that. So you won't see that 19 million like reflected on this document, but it is removed out for 25 for this committee's.
So 19 million, even though it's not reflected there, is moved out.
Correct.
And then under 26, what items are no longer in this budget?
It's just item 2, that ERP modernization.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Stephen. Next, we'll have agency presentation by Secretary Adam Prophet. Adam, welcome committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Adam Prophet, Secretary for the Department of Administration. Appreciate you guys having me in front of you to explain a little bit more about what's happening with our agency. I do have with me a couple of experts in the room. I've got my Chief of Staff, Samir Arif, and 2 of my Deputy Secretaries, Frank Burnham, who heads up the operational side of the House, and then Craig Knowlton, who heads up the management services sides of the House, so think about shared services. I believe you guys received a deck from Department of Administration that would walk through some items. It looks like this. I'm going to spare you a lot of the details and just move straight to page 6 in the interest of time. I know you have some other interested parties behind us that you need to get to today, so we'll just talk about the enhancements. I believe most of you know what we do at Department of Administration. We are the state's central service organization. Some refer to us as a state agency for state agencies. What that means is we have a central accounting and federal reporting and audit team. We have central HR, central procurement. We are the state's landlord, for lack of better terms, handle all the facilities and property management. We have the state print plant and mail and surplus. So point is our fingers are kind of everywhere in state government. And we, as Stephen mentioned, a lot of our budget is handled off budget. So if we can just move straight to, as I mentioned, page 6 on here, talk about the enhancement requests. And I want to note that, and I'm going to have to caveat this in a little bit, all 3 of the items that are listed on here were contained in House Bill 2007 as it came across the floor to this committee. All right, and I'll caveat that in just a little bit. So the first 2 requests are not new requests for new spending. I want to be crystal clear about that. So item 1 is a $400,000 for the mail scanning equipment and the complex, the annex that it goes into. This was actually approved by the 2024 legislature. As the white powder incident happened and some other threats, are being identified across time, we want to make sure that we have the most up-to-date and best mail scanning equipment, because all of the mail that comes from USPS into this building, whether it goes to the governor's office or to legislative staff or to legislators, gets run through our scanning equipment. So we purchased new scanning equipment that identifies explosive threats and chemical threats of a wide variety to make sure that anything that comes in here is safe. Again, this money was appropriated to us in fiscal 24. This is 100% my mistake. I will own this mistake. It did not have reappropriation language, and we did not provide an encumbrance in fiscal 24. The purchase didn't happen until fiscal 25, so the money got lapsed. So I'm just asking to have the money put back into the fiscal 25 budget that was already approved last year. We've procured the equipment, we built the facility, we have this operation stood up. It's in partnership with KHP, so the mail that is coming to this building today is going through this process. I'm just asking to have the money put back in this year's budget. Again, this is in House Bill 2007. My request is not to take it out. Item number 2, as Stephen mentioned, we do all the SGF debt service for the state of Kansas. So last year's legislature approved the issuance of 3 separate bonds and 3 separate agencies. It put the debt service for those bonds into the agencies. So we are asking to consolidate the debt service and the issuance of the bonds into Department of Administration so we can continue with our philosophy of being the debt servicer for the state of Kansas. This is important. We have calls set up with ratings agencies over the next couple of weeks and other investors, and they want to make sure that the money is in here. Again, this is in 2007. I'm just asking to make sure it stays in there. Again, not net new spend. We are lapsing the funding from other agencies and putting it into D of A. So for the state, it's a net neutral transaction. The third one is a rather large expenditure request. And here's what the caveat was. It did make it across the floor in 2007 as ARPA interest to pay for it. With the global amendment that was made, it got taken out. So as it stands today, this money is not in here. We are requesting over the course of 3 to 5 years, roughly $100 million to stand up a new ERP for the state of Kansas. ERP is basically, you think of the central nervous system for all administrative functions in the state of Kansas. You think of our budgeting tool, think about accounting, HR, payroll, recruitment, grants management, procurement, everything. That's what this would do. So it touches every single agency and just about every single administrative function. We think it's going to take about $100 million over the course of 3 years to stand this up. Once it gets stood up, the ongoing costs will be largely similar to what we pay today, but instead of having a fragmented approach over a host of different systems that some do not talk to the others, so we have to do a lot of manual intervention to make the data tie, we're moving to a single vendor, end-to-end cloud-based solution where everything will be covered underneath this. A lot of states are moving this direction. I think about half of the states have either converted to a cloud-based solution, a modernized solution. The other half of the states are in conversations. I want to be crystal clear. Our system today is not broken today. We have a good relationship with our partner. Oracle PeopleSoft is a product that we use. The deal is what we use is called an on-premise solution. And what that means is we purchase the licensing and we bring that version of the product down, and my team does the configurations and support and make sure that it operates for the state of Kansas. They are indicating that at some point in the future, they're going to get away from on-prem solutions and move to a cloud-based solution. So what that means for the state of Kansas is sometime in the near future, this change is going to happen. We've analyzed this over the last couple of years. We brought in a consultant to help us walk through the analysis to see whether this is the right move for the state of Kansas or not. They had a whole host of interviews with 12 or 15 different state agencies. We brought in different levels of employees, analysts, manager, director, secretaries, different functions. We brought in procurement specialists. We brought in accountants. We brought in budget folks. We brought in a wide swath of users to make sure that we're targeting and getting their feedback. And at the end of the day, the recommendation was, your process, again, your team does amazing work with the tool that you have. They're able to get things done, but a lot of the processes, the business processes, are wildly inefficient. A lot of it's managed through spreadsheets and pulling information down, manipulating the data, and then sending it to somebody else. The prime example of that is how we build a state budget. The tool that we build the state budget in is called iBars. It's been a perfectly good tool for a number of years. It was installed in either 1999 or 2000. But it does not talk to our accounting system, and it does not talk to our HR system. What that means is we had to pull data out of iBars, and we had to pull data out of the accounting system and the HR system, and then get the two to tie, and then we had to manipulate the data and then load it back into iBars. So at no point in time can I run one report that shows budget versus actuals to date. At no point in time can I tell you which FTE that is vacant is funded. I have to get the FTE list out of one system and then go to another system to find out which ones are funded. I'm just highlighting some of the inefficiencies that are in the system today. I recognize this is a large ask. I'm asking for a lot of money to improve a tool, and I think it's going to greatly increase our operational efficiency. This is going to be, like I said, a 3 to 5 year project, but once we get it stood up, we feel that it's going to be in the best interest of the state, and we're going to find a lot more efficiencies, and we're going to be a lot happier with this product. And the goal, candidly, would be to have this new product for the next, I don't want to put an exact year on it, but 20, 30 years that carries us into the future. So the next generation of administrations and legislatures can have something that works better for them and Kansans as well. So there's a lot more information on, it's a condensed version of a deck that our consultant provided for us. It gives you some of the statistics on which states are looking at what the high end and the low end of the estimate of costs are to get this stood up. And how long it's going to take, and then what the operational costs ongoing would be. As I mentioned, today we pay approximately $5 or $6 million across each of our systems to operate all of our systems. We anticipate a new system is probably going to cost in the neighborhood of about $7 million a year. So a modest increase relative to what we have today, but trying to increase the efficiencies. Those are the enhancement requests that I had in the budget. I do have another couple of topics that I'd like to touch on, if it's okay, Mr. Chair, that are not in my testimony.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to thank the legislature on behalf of the entire administration for the support we've received over the past couple of years as it relates to employee pay. As you all know, there was a long time where employees went without getting a pay raise. At the same time, there was an increase in the cost for insurance, so employees' paychecks were going down for a period of time. This legislature, in partnership with the administration, has been very generous in providing market adjustments and getting employee pay back to where it should be. This year, the proposal that came across from the House is trying to accomplish that goal as well, and we're very grateful for that. So I want to make sure I'm saying that up front. The way this is structured is that anybody whose rate of pay is greater than 10% below what their market comp should be, that brings them up to 10% or a 2.5% increase, whichever is greater. For anybody whose rate of pay is below 10% of market and above 10% of market, they're getting a 2.5% pay adjustment. For anybody whose rate of pay is more than 10% above their market comp, they're getting a 1% adjustment. The 1% adjustment is really what the problem and the sticking point is. The way that we have our pay system set up is on a grade and step level. The classified system must follow this grade and step level. And the grades go on the vertical axis and the steps go on the horizontal axis. Every step represents about a 2.5% increase in pay. So as you move across the steps within your grade, the next step is approximately 2.5%. As you move up in step, it's approximately, step sideways, grades upward. That's approximately a 5% jump. To do a 1% increase for any employees that are on the classified pay matrix, now you're going to have two different rates of pay on one grade and step level, and that kind of blows the whole system up, for lack of better terms. The only way that we could accomplish a 1% pay adjustment for classified employees is to take the entirety of the pay matrix and increase everything by 1%. We're happy to do that, but the net impact of how things are structured today is that those employees that are getting 2.5%, which again we appreciate, would also get caught in the plus 1% increase in the pay matrix. So it ended up being a 3.5% increase. So the total cost of the pay plan would increase dramatically if it's left as it is. Our preference would be for any movement on the pay matrix to be in about 2.5% increments. That's just administratively easier, and it's going to keep the cost down relative to what it could be if we had to find a solution where everything went up by 1%. It's a lot of information. I'm happy to show it to anybody and walk through it with you in your offices just to kind of demonstrate what it is that we're getting at. One other item or two other items I wanted to touch on. The first is the FTE. Stephen mentioned that within our agency, we're doing some shuffling. I want to make sure I'm clear with this committee. We are requesting one additional FTE across the entirety of the Department of Administration, and that is not a net new FTE to the state. That person right now is the one that does all the badges, the state IDs for state employees. They currently work for the KHP. When docking comes online, they're going to transition to be a Department of Administration employee. So our FTEs will go one, theirs will go down by one. So it's a net neutral for the state. It does show up as one new FTE for Department of Administration. Same person, same job, new department. And the final thing I'd like to touch on, Mr. Chair, is again related to docking. I get a lot of questions about docking, and so I thought it'd be best to just get ahead of any questions that might be from this committee. The first question I get is, who's moving to docking? So the agencies that are moving to docking, and I can present this letter to the committee. The agencies going to docking this summer are going to be Secretary of State, Department of Commerce, Office of Personnel Services, which is our centralized HR team, Division of the Budget, Capitol Police, and then the Office of Facilities and Property Management. They have some trades group that used to be in the basin of docking. They got moved out during the renovation. They're going to come back and go to where they were. We were very, very intentional as Department of Administration with who we selected to go into docking. We had to look at a number of factors. First and foremost, fit. And when I say fit for the building, I mean two things. Physical fit, does a number of their staff fit within the space that we have available within docking, and also fit for what the building is. We view this building as sort of the front gate to state government, people's first experience with state government. It's a highlight building, all the cool things we did with it. So the more public traffic that goes there, the better off we're going to be. Or connectivity with the legislature. There's the tunnel that connects the two buildings. So Secretary of State, when you guys all do your filings, you go to the Secretary of State's office. It's a very public area. We can showcase that. Businesses across the state, they do their business filings or their annual filings every year, Secretary of State, a lot of folks come in there. And they happen to fit very nicely on the first floor, the space that's available. Second floor is going to be Department of Commerce. Their job is largely to recruit other companies to the state of Kansas. So what better way to showcase what Kansas is than having them in this brand new building? We're also going to have some video walls up there, and we're going to have a lot of marketing material that showcases all four corners of the state of Kansas. So it felt like having them in there and having them run the video content board is going to be helpful. Again, they also happen to fit nicely on the second floor, as does the Office of Personnel Services, which is where employees go on day one, again, to get their badges and to do training. Division of the Budget has a large connectivity, obviously, to the State House, where we are quite a bit. I've got a few of my folks over there. And then the governor spends several weeks, all governors have spent several weeks in the budget office over the past 20 years building the budget and speaking with staff. The space that we have right now over in the Landing State Office building was built to be temporary headquarters. The budget used to be in the Capitol, and it became permanent. So we have temporary walls up. It's just an old area. It needs to be redone, so we're going to move budget over there. And again, happens to fit. Also, the domino effects. So the domino effects are, as Secretary of State moves out of Memorial Hall and into docking, that leaves space in Memorial Hall. Well, the Attorney General has divisions across a multitude of buildings across the city, some of which are private leases. This presents an opportunity to bring them into Memorial Hall such that the Attorney General is the sole tenant within Memorial Hall. That is a more efficient way to operate that business. You've heard from Kansas Highway Patrol that they are needing a new headquarters. Right now, they're in 2 different buildings. That space no longer works for them. Their lease is going to expire at about the same time that we can reconfigure the first floor of the Curtis State Office building, and they fit the Curtis State Office building, and it fits their needs. There are some other agencies that we're identifying that can come into Landon State Office building. We have not yet identified those publicly, so I'd like to not say them here. I think it's best those agencies hear that from their leadership, but we're in talks with them. Really, the critical component of this is what it took to get agencies into docking once we identified them. We had to sit down with the agencies. Frank Burnham, my Deputy Secretary of Operations, leads the Office of Facilities and Property Management. He also has the architects and engineers on his team, both his team and the on-call. So we sat down with every single one of the agencies that are going over there and discussed what it's going to take to get them in there. We identified how many people need an office. We identified how many people need a cube. We identified what their space needs were, what the conference room needs were, what it was going to take to put them in there. The reason we did that is because when docking was approved, it was approved as a white box, meaning just walls, ceiling, floor, that's it. With the agencies that are going in there, we have configured the structural integrity of the building and the mechanical components of the building around the specific needs of the agencies going in there. Meaning, on the 3rd floor, for example, the way my office is going to configure, the header was going to run across the middle offices. We had to move the header back about 3 feet to make up for that configuration. So we've made that change. We've put doors into certain areas. We've run the HVAC around certain areas based on the ceiling height and the configuration of the offices. Point is, the building is designed specifically around these agencies, and it's not something that we can adjust right now that we're 3 months out from taking occupancy of the building. So just want to make sure that I'm having that conversation in this committee. So with that, Mr. Chair, I think I've taken up more time than you wanted me to, so I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Adam, thank you for your presentation. The furniture that goes over there, somebody mentioned to me the other day with what's going on in the United States, there ought to be a lot of used furniture. So are we going to be looking around to new versus used and trying to get a price that way? You might comment on that, and then I got a follow-up too.
Very good. Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you for the question, Senator. The short answer is we're not going down that path. We're, again, so far down the path of the agencies going in there, and the configurations that we designed were specific to the furniture that we're going to put in there. So we're going to have some hard wall offices. What I mean by hard wall offices is, framed out with 2x4s and the drywall that goes around it. But the vast majority is going to be what we call demountable office space. So we're going to have offices that will go floor to ceiling, and they'll be glass, so that's letting in a lot of natural light, but they're demountable so we can move them around a little bit if we need to. We already have a vendor picked out and a style picked out and the desk types that we're going to pick out, and we're really too far down the path to make any adjustments at this point. To the extent that we can find some cost savings, we're absolutely going to go down that path. But as it relates to what's going in the building, we're a couple of months out from going live.
Senator Fagg.
Mr. Chairman, my follow-up is a 10-minute statement I want to make on that Series 2025 debt service. That's a prime example where we could use general obligation bonds possibly. So if you look in our financial toolbox, that will be a revenue bond that we're doing there. and we cannot do general obligation bonds. So I just, that's as far as we need to take this, but I want to give the committee an example of where this would be. Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Petty.
Adam, thanks for sharing the information about docking. And I think what you didn't add was how much, so when you talk about your team and the work that's gone into making these plans for the moves with the different departments, how much time has already been invested to have this? So I'm asking this because you mentioned 3 months out, and I think we probably all would be interested in seeing the fact that when the building opens up, that there are actually, the tenants are there. So how much pre-time has gone into that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you for the question, Senator. I'll give you two answers. So Frank and I have been sitting down and talking about this for quite literally 2 years, since we started the deconstruction and reconstruction project. And again, we were looking at all the dominoes, all the fit, all the components. It really was like a Rubik's Cube. As it relates to working with the agencies that were identified to go in there, we notified them this past summer of our decision to move them in there, and we made sure that we approach each of the agency heads, specifically Secretary of State and Attorney General, who's going to get a backfill to say, hey, we would like to move you over there. These are the reasons we think it's important, and we got their buy-in. It was important to get their buy-in. So we started that process this past summer, and again, right away, we sat down with those teams and started working through the plans and the designs and the configurations and figuring out who's going to go where the conduit's going to go to run electrical and wire, where the poke outs through the floor are going to go. So this has been going on for probably 8 or 9 months at this point, and touch points along the way. So yeah, any deviation from that path at this point in time is going to create another probably 9-month delay if that were to happen. I don't anticipate it happening, but yeah, we're 3 months out, and to be crystal clear on 3 months out, we anticipate taking the keys around July 1. That doesn't mean the building's going to be fully open and to the public and everything's going to be operational. That's when we'll start moving in the first agency and the second agency. We anticipate sometime in mid-fall, all the components, everything being ready to go.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Adam. Appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next, we'll open our hearing on the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services and the state hospitals. We'll start out with a staff overview by Dayton Lemunion, KLRD. Dayton, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'll be working out of volume 2 of the budget summary on page 296. So I'll give a moment to get to that page. And that's page 296. Okay. So I
Go
will
ahead, Dayton.
turn to page 297. This would begin the fiscal year 2025 analysis. I'll take a similar approach to Stephen in hitting the changes that were made by the Legislative Budget Committee and by the House. So I'd first like to look at the State General Fund reappropriation. There was a total reappropriation of $282.3 million. The first amount of that, $150.5 million, was lapsed by the agency. And if you turn to page 298, that first bullet, the HCBS 10% FMAP savings, that $45 million was also lapsed by the Legislative Budget Committee. However, the House Committee added that funding back. That funding is unique in that it was savings from the public health emergency, and the State General Fund savings are required to be spent on HCBS projects. Otherwise, they have to be returned to the federal government. So that funding was restored. by the House. And then that final bullet, state operations, $3.7 million was lapsed by the Legislative Budget Committee, and that was not restored by the House.
You say it was or was not?
Was not.
Not, okay.
The 3.7 million, it remains lapsed. And then moving to item 3, the agency did have one enhancement request in fiscal year 2025 for $1 million for the Nutrition Services Incentive Program. The federal government reduced the grant by $650,000. So the agency requested a supplemental of $1 million to meet that cut in the federal funding, as well as to reduce wait lists and services for senior nutrition. The House did not recommend funding this in 2025, and neither did the governor, which would take me to the next sheet that I wanted to draw your attention to, which is the yellow sheet. There are 2 items that were recommended by the governor that were not adopted by the House. So items 1 and 2 under 2025 are not in the House position. The first of those is to delete 3 million state general fund to adjust the estimate for reimbursement for counties and hospitals. And these are for costs incurred in holding individuals who are awaiting evaluation at a state hospital. The second item is a deletion of 4 million, including 1 million from the state general fund. And this is a transfer to KDHE for the ePassR tool. So this would be a net zero statewide, a transfer from KDADS to KDHE if it were to be adopted. And then finally, on the House shorthand, which is your green document, looking at page 10 of that document, there are 2 items for fiscal year 2025. The first you will see is restoring the HCBS FMAP lapse, the $45.1 million that I referenced. The second is the addition of $140,000 state general fund for in-home services for low-income older individuals. So this was a request from public testimony in the Budget Committee, and it is for the Nursing Home Without Walls program. They received federal funding or federal COVID funds from the agency to do a pilot program of telehealth services. And this funding was requested to meet a gap in the funding and complete that pilot program. And I'd stand for questions on 25.
Questions on 25? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on 25, that the HCBS FMAP, that's in, and the 140,000, that's in. And is the Nursing Home Without Walls program, did that start last year?
Mr. Chair, Senator, I believe it started last year. I'd have to double check when the grant was released. It was, if I recall correctly, part of the Spark funding. $66 million was sent to KDADS to distribute, and part of those grants were for the Nursing Home Without Walls program.
So initially that was funded with Sparks dollars, and this is then an addition from SGF to continue the pilot?
My understanding, and it was a public testimony request, so you might have that in your written testimony, but that the funding is sort of a gap filler to complete that pilot project. They're supposed to come out with a report on how successful the piloted services were, with an idea of potentially creating those as Medicaid services in the future.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, please proceed.
All right, then back to the budget summary. Turning to page 301. The agency's request did have 14 enhancement requests for fiscal year 26. So I'll turn to page 302 and go through those one by one. The first request was $45 million for provider compliance. The agency requested these grants to provide to providers to assist them in coming into compliance with federal requirements. There were sort of three areas that were highlighted in the request. The first was for community developmental disability organizations, or CDDOs, providing waiver services. The funds would be used to establish independent CDDOs. The second was for targeted case managers, management organizations providing TCM and waiver services. And the final was for congregate HCBS providers to satisfy the final settings rule. This enhancement request was deleted by the Legislative Budget Committee in the global motion. It was not added by the House, so this is not currently in the budget. And the governor did recommend funding this at $20 million. Item 2. Items 2, 3, and 4 are all actually grouped together because they're similar. Earlier this year, you heard a presentation from the agency regarding the waivers, and they noted they had enhancement requests to assist or to fund the increasing caseload for the waivers. So for example, if you look at item 2, the frail elderly waiver, the agency stated the number of eligible participants has increased by 7% per year, and this funding would help avoid the creation of a wait list for those services. So this is the same situation for items 3 and 4 for the technology-assisted and brain injury waiver. The House did not add funding for 2, 3, or 4. The governor did recommend funding those 3 enhancement requests. However, they were at slightly different amounts. So I'll draw your attention to the yellow sheet briefly. If you would look at item 9, the governor recommended funding this item at $16.1 million, all funds. And the shift or the difference in funding is really due to the agency having an updated estimate by the time of their appeal on this enhancement. And item 6 would be the governor's recommendation for the brain injury waiver. And item 11 would be the technology-assisted waiver. Moving back to the budget summary. And continuing to page 303. Item 5 is the community support waiver. You'll recall that the agency has been working to create a waiver for individuals with IDD. This would have less intensive supports than the comprehensive waiver. So this would be the funding to fund the first partial year's cost of that waiver to serve 250 individuals. This item is included in the House budget, and the governor also recommended funding this item. Item 6, the agency requested $4 million to continue its contract with Public Consulting Group to develop the community support waiver, implement recommendations from the special committees on IDD waiver modernization, and to manage the compliance grants. The House did not add funding for this item. The governor did recommend funding this at $2 million. Item 7, Nutrition Services Incentive Program. This is the same item requested in fiscal year 2025 to offset that decrease in federal funding. The House did fund this item, and the governor also recommended funding it. Turning to page 304. Item number 8, the Nursing Facility for Mental Health Settlement. The agency requested $500,000 from the State General Fund to continue funding contract positions that are currently funded with federal funds. The House did not recommend funding this, nor did the governor. Item 9, the agency requested $102,000 to create an aging services manager position to supervise a number of positions handling elder issues in the agency. The House did not fund this, nor did the governor recommend funding it. And item 10, the agency requested $180,000, including $90,000 from the State General Fund, to fund existing positions funded with HCBS FMAP that oversee the PACE or that assist with the PACE program. The House did not fund this, nor did the governor recommend funding for this. So the next couple of items are state institutions building funds. So they're actually for projects at the state hospital. So I would draw your attention to this tan sheet of paper that you have. I'm not going to walk through it, but just for your information, this reflects the status of the 3 state building funds as of the House recommendation. So item 11, the agency requested $3.5 million, all from the State Institutions Building Fund, to fund the Priority 2 projects that were included in the 5-year plan. The bulk of that would be used to replace the Osawatomie State Hospital medium voltage electrical system. The House did not fund this item. The governor did recommend funding it. Turning to page 305, item 12, the Adair Acute Care building remodel. The agency requested $4.7 million, again from the SIBF, to remodel the A building at Adair Acute Care on the Osawatomie campus. This houses the federally certified beds on that campus. The House did not recommend funding this item. The governor did. Item 13, the agency requests $2 million SIBF to remodel the Cottonwood Resource Center building at Osawatomie. The House did, this is State Institutions Building Fund again. The House did not recommend funding this item. Item 14, Osawatomie State Hospital Special Services and Myco House remodel. The agency requested $926,000 SIBF to remodel the Special Services building and an area in the reintegration facility. The House did not recommend funding this, and the governor did. Those are all of the agency enhancement requests. I would turn to page 306 to briefly note on item 16. The Medicaid add-on payment for nursing facilities has been added the past several years. However, each year it's added for 1 year only so that it can be reevaluated each year. So this was not included in the agency's budget request. However, the House did fund this item. So if you turn to your shorthand sheet and look at fiscal year 2026, item 1, the add-on for nursing facilities was funded at $75.5 million, all funds. And this would be a rate of $20 per day. So now I'll be working just from the shorthand. These are going to be items that were not in the agency request, but were added by the House committee based on public testimony, mostly. So we'll look at item 2, IDD waiver slots. $22.4 million, including $8.7 million state general fund, was added to add another 320 individuals to the wait list, or from the wait list to the IDD waiver for fiscal year 2026. You'll recall that last year, 500 people, funding was added to add 500 people from the wait list to the waiver. Item 3, the addition of $6 million state general fund for one-time grants to community mental health centers for fiscal year 2026 to assist in serving individuals who are uninsured. Item 4, add $12.4 million, including $4.8 million state general fund to fully rebase nursing facility reimbursement rates. This is typically done through caseloads. The past couple of years, it's been a joint process where the legislature adds funding and the caseloads group also adds funding. So in the fall caseloads, there was an inflationary adjustment added, and the addition of this $12.4 million would bring that total investment up to a full rebase. Item 5, the addition of $2 million state general fund to fund addiction psychiatry and child and adolescent psychiatry fellowships, nursing programs, and educational pathways for the Kansas Behavioral Health Center of Excellence. Funding was added last year for the Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, and these are for training programs for those behavioral health staff. And this would create additional fellowships for those training programs. Item 6, add $1.8 million state general fund and add language directing the agency to expend the funds for workforce development for SUD providers. This was a request by Mirror Inc. Last year, $1.8 million was added for Mirror for workforce development, and this would be sort of a continuation. Item 7, Add 4.2 million, including 1.7 million state general fund to increase the specialized medical care rate from $50 to $55 per hour. And this would impact both the TA and IDD waivers. This is another item that in recent years, that rate has been increased incrementally. Turning to page 11. Item 8, add 1.6 million state general fund for problematic sexual behavior, cognitive behavioral therapy program for additional training, clinician salaries, and expansion to rural and frontier communities. Item 9, add 3.9 million, including 1.5 million state general fund, and add language directing the agency to expend the funds for a behavioral health add-on payment of $175 per Medicaid day for nursing facilities for a pilot program capped at 125 participants. So I would contrast this with item 1, which was the add-on payment. This is specifically for behavioral health, and it is a pilot program that is capped at 125. So a difference there to the add-on that you all have typically added. Items 10 and 11, I already referenced in the budget summary. Those were enhancement requests that are funded. Item 12, add 830,000 SGF in one-time funding and add language directing the agency to expend the funds to renovate a homeless shelter. Item 13, this is the nursing home without walls item that was in fiscal year 25. So that was split between the current year and the budget year. The current year funding was to fill the gap so they could continue the program, and this would be the remainder of the funding to complete the pilot. Item 14, add 1 million, including 415, 122, that should be $1,000, not $1 million, from the state general fund to raise rates for 5 rates on the brain injury waiver, and those would increase those rates from $18.99 per hour to $20 per hour. The next item, Core Communities Grant, add 350,000 state general fund and language directing the agency to expend the funds to provide financial training and peer mentoring to address poverty. This item was also funded last year. However, it was in DCF last year. Item 16, add 250,000 and language directing the agency to expend the funds to provide aftercare services for individuals discharged from a psychiatric residential treatment facility. This was requested by Ember Hope and was funded last year. Item 17, add language requiring the agency to share eligibility information for program participants with KDHE and DCF, and requiring agencies to immediately take action concerning fraud identified by the Medicaid Inspector General for fiscal year 2026. This language is also in the DCF budget. Item 18, add language to cap the waitlist for the IDD waiver at 4,000 participants and to cap the waitlist for the PD waiver at 1,800. And again, this is similar to language that was added in last year's bill. Item 19, add language to increase the vending transfer up to $12 million at a rate of $1 million per month for 26. For 25, that rate is set at $10 million by proviso. Item 20, add language to provide 2.4% of the funds appropriated for new IDD waiver slots to the CDDOs for administrative costs related to the new waiver slots. You might recall last year that when the funding was added for the new waiver slots in the mega appropriations bill, funding was subsequently added for CDDO administration in the omnibus budget bill. This would just take the existing appropriation that you're making for the 320 slots and reduce an amount of that to provide to the CDDOs. And turning to the next page. Item 21. This would add language to rebase rates for the PACE program at 90% of the amount that otherwise would have been paid for fiscal year 26. Again, similar to what was done last year, this would have an estimated impact of about 1.2 million, but it could differ based on what the rates are based on the approved budget passed by the legislature this year. Item 22. This item is a net zero impact for the state general fund. It is shifting funds $2 million from the mental health intervention team program and adding that 2 million and language directing the agency to issue a request for proposal for a pilot program to provide telehealth services to students. And I would now stand for questions on those items.
Questions? Senator Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of questions for you, Dayton. First, item 12 on the green sheet. We're just going to spend $830,000 renovating a homeless shelter. Could you tell me where?
Mr. Chair, Senator, I believe it's a homeless shelter in Liberal, Kansas. It was a public testimony request, so I can forward that request to you all.
Okay. Next question. I know in years past, there's been an additional allocation. It was either 5 or 6 million to the block grant for SUD providers. Is that nowhere in this budget this year?
Mr. Chair, Senator, there's no additional, that item's not in the budget this year.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Petty.
So, so I wanted to make sure, so all of these items that we just went through were added by the House. But the brain injury waiver rates, was that already a request?
Mr. Chair, Senator, that was not a request. I think you're referring to the enhancement request for the brain injury waiver participation. So this item that you're referring to on the green sheet is to increase the reimbursement rate. The agency request was due to increased participation, so it's kind of population versus rates.
Okay, thanks. And then you mentioned that number 15, that this was already in place, but it was from DCF and it was moved to into the Department of Aging, or skip route, Department of Aging and Disability Services. Is this correct?
Mr. Chair, Senator, it was a 1-year grant last year that went through the DCF budget, and this year it is one time again going through the KDAD's budget. That's
okay. So, and then number 17, the this is just adding language to require the agencies to do this, even though this isn't required now, and that's directing them to do that.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, this is adding language directing them to share that eligibility information between the 3 agencies.
And then the last question I have is about number 22, the telehealth services for students. So the MHIT program was, am I correct, was moved last year from the Department of Education to KDAD's. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, that's correct.
And this particular request it's taking money from the MHIT program to go specifically for a, is this an RFP for a particular service?
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, this would reduce the appropriation for the MHIT program in 26 and use that funding for this RFP for a pilot program for telehealth services. That's correct.
So the MHIT program itself, I mean, it may just be a wash of the number of services, but I mean, schools that could be serviced. But this is specifically saying that 2 million from that MHIT money has to go specifically for, and am I right that there will be an RFP that goes out concerning this telehealth program?
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, the MHIT program's appropriation will be reduced, so it won't necessarily be an RFP to provide the services as part of that MHIT program. So the funding will be moved from the MHIT into this pilot program.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you to Damon, or Dayton, excuse me. Next, we'll have agency presentation with Secretary Laura Howard. Secretary, welcome committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. You should have a couple-page document in front of us. It looks like a letter, and then it has a table attached to it. KDAD's budget priorities. I'll speak from that. We did include both KDAD's and the state hospitals on this, so I can just touch on that. And then after you do the state hospitals, we can go back to that item if need be. So again, thank you for letting us be here today to highlight some of our highest budget priorities that aren't reflected currently within the House recommendation. I think Dayton did a great job of talking about what was included in the House recommendation, the various items that were added. We're grateful that the House included a couple of the governor's budget recommendations in the budget, particularly related to the nutrition program and also to begin the community support waiver. But there were some high budget priorities that were in the governor's budget that we would continue to make a request to you to consider, although we've reduced some of the funding amounts for those. So I really wanted to call out 5 specific things that I would ask this committee to consider in terms of our highest priorities. The first would be funding to prevent waiting lists on the home and community-based service waivers. And we had the chance to talk with you about this a few weeks ago. But, as you know, the IDD waiting list has had a waiver for a long time. Other waivers have not had waiting lists. And based on our current estimates, the for elderly waiver, the technology assistance waiver, and the brain injury waiver would all have to have waiting lists should additional funding not be added. So that's the first item we reference. In total across those 3 waivers, that's $8.6 million from the state general fund. We've seen about a 7% increase in participants on the for elderly waiver since in 2024, an 11% increase in the technology assistance waiver, and a 6% increase in the brain injury waiver. And again, these are part of the Medicaid program, but they aren't considered during the consensus caseload process because HCBS waivers are not entitlement programs. So again, we would request that you would consider additional funds to avert us having to start a waiting list for those programs. The second item I wanted to talk to you about is some funding that we had initially requested, about $45 million. And today I'm asking you for $10 million for some targeted grants to our IDD, intellectual and developmental disability providers, that has to do with some of the modernization efforts that are going on. There's a lot of activity going on in the IDD world, as you know. Many of you are hearing from your constituents, and we're meeting regularly with InterHab and families and stakeholders. But we're asking for $10 million that would allow us to provide funding to help those providers with some of the resolution of some of the conflict of interest issues, and also to grow provider capacity, particularly as we implement a new community support waiver. So the funding could be used in a lot of different ways. It could help those CDDOs who decide to take some steps to establish independent CDDOs or to further or to separate their service provision. It would also help providers come into compliance with other facets of the final settings rule, and also to expand services. We know that capacity is a big issue in our programs, and so this funding would also allow grants to expand the capacity of HCBS providers, including adult care home types and other community-based waiver settings, to meet the growing demand, and again, to meet the demand as we would implement the new community supports waiver in HCBS programs overall. As I said, we had started with a request for $45 million. The governor had recommended $20 million, and none of that's in the House. I'm asking you today for $10 million, again, that would be grants to help those providers with some transitions. The third item I wanted to talk about actually relates to fiscal year '25. And similar to what Secretary Profit talked about, there's about $3.7 million in funding that was lapsed in terms of reappropriated funding. I'm requesting that you restore $2.7 million of that. Most of that is for funding related to the electronic health records project at the state hospitals. You previously approved that funding. We did not get that all spent in the prior year, so we carried it over. That funding has been committed and spent, and we have some other, then we also have about $600,000 that also has been committed in the current year to some staffing costs. Again, funding that was carried over, neither of those would go into the base, but we would ask you to restore 2.7 million of the 3.7 reappropriation. And I might mention, as Dayton said, in our submitted budget, we had already quite a bit of funding and reappropriations was already lapsed. So I would ask for that 2.7 million committed or spent, again, on projects and activities previously approved by this legislature. The fourth item relates more to the state hospitals. I'll mention it briefly, and we can talk a little bit more about it after the state hospital presentations. But I would ask that you restore funding for contract staffing at Larned State Hospital in fiscal year 2026. The governor approved $32.6 million for contract staffing. That was not included in the House recommendation in fiscal year 26. You'll hear from Dayton that funding was approved in fiscal year 25 for Larned and in both fiscal years at Osawatomie, but it was not approved in Larned. And again, we can talk more about that with the state hospital budgets. And I have Deputy Secretary Bruner with me as well today to talk about that. And also related to that, the House had put a proviso on that would say that no contract labor could be used at Larned at all in fiscal year 27. And we would ask that that proviso be removed. The last item that I wanted to talk about, I'm thankful that the House in the across-the-board budget reduction recommendation excluded state hospitals. Should an across-the-board cut of state operations be included in the final budget? I would just also ask that within the KDAD's budget, you would also exclude the funding that's going towards the new Wichita Hospital, the South Central Regional Hospital. It doesn't show up in a standalone budget yet. It still shows up in the KDAD's budget. And so we would just ask that you would exclude the Wichita Hospital, the South Central Regional Hospital from any across-the-board reduction. Those are the 5 things I wanted to talk about as a priority. As again, on the other page, we did list for you on the table in the blue, those governor's budget enhancements not included in 2007. I talked to you about a few of those. And then on the back of the page, the 2 that were included from the governor's budget recommendation, which was $2.5 million all funds to stand up the new community support waiver and $1 million to make up for federal funding reductions in nutrition services. And I would ask that you retain those in the budget. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Secretary. Questions? Not seeing any. Do you know why the House had left some of this out? What was their thoughts on that?
I can't speak to that, Senator. I mean, I would say that the House heard certainly from the agency and then heard from 65 conferees with their various requests. And I think as you saw, a number of stakeholder requests were included in the budget. We were disappointed that some of the priorities, particularly around the waivers, were not included.
So you did present to them yourself?
I did, yeah,
And
absolutely,
you
Senator.
had the same list?
Yes, that's right, Senator.
And these 5 items were left off, and they just said we're leaving them off? They didn't give you any kind of explanation?
They weren't included in their recommendations, so. A lot of things were, as you saw, and that's why I'm here talking to you about it today. I think those are important. I mean, they're important priorities from my perspective in the sense of existing programs and making sure that we're investing appropriately in those existing programs and sustaining those capacities.
Have you had conversation with High Plains Mental Health in Hayes about possibly putting some beds in Hayes, Kansas?
You might say a little bit more, Senator, in terms of what types of beds, Senator?
Mental health beds.
You know, in the context of conversation about crisis beds and crisis intervention center beds, I mean, we've had some dialogue. In fact, we have within existing funding that's in the agency's budget related to crisis services and the crisis intervention center funding, we actually have a grant proposal going out to centers who wish to apply for that. That's just now come out or will be coming out within the next week or so.
So when they removed this funding for Larned, and you said a proviso with language, so can you tell me at Larned, how many beds are there that you use? What's the number of beds for patients at Larned?
Yeah, let me ask Deputy Secretary Bruner to speak to that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Scott Bruner, Deputy Secretary for Hospitals. So there's 94 beds for patients who are in acute mental health crisis. That's our care and treatment beds. There's about 140 for criminal defendants for competency or longer term stays, and then a little under 350 for sexual predators.
Okay, so we have 350, 140, and 94.
Yes.
Okay, and how much staffing do you have? How many beds can you staff there without outside traveling staff?
That's a really good question. It's probably in the vicinity of half. It's a little different depending on the program with the staffing ratios, but I'd say as a global number, we've got state staff that we could support maybe half that volume.
So we've got about twice as many patients there that we can handle staff-wise.
And we're using contract labor to make up the difference to not have to do that. But in terms of the staffing ratios and our state employees only, it would be a smaller number. And I'd without asking the experts more details, I'd guess it's about half.
Because that, I mean, we're set up that the way this is set up, when we have that many beds and that few staff, I mean, we're kind of painted into a corner where either we need to eliminate some beds so the staff can handle that, or pay the traveling staff, correct?
We're making a choice and asking for the funding to keep the capacity where it is so the system can have enough or have as many beds as we can provide for adults that are in crisis, for criminal defendants that need competency, and for sexual predators that we're obligated to house. And we're making up the difference with contract labor. But that's an explicit decision to keep the beds open that are there, is not make as many reductions as we'd have to. And with the legislature's support over time, we've managed to do that. But that's an explicit choice. Yeah, I think I'm agreeing. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And so 94 beds are generally all full?
Yes.
Do you have some vacancies?
Running a waiting list of about 13 or 14 today.
Wait list on the 94, 140, are they normally full?
Yes. And a wait list.
And a wait list there?
We're around 200 and 210.
200 on the wait list, and 350.
There isn't a wait list for the sexual predator inpatient beds, but that's about our capacity. So those are full as well.
So the 350 are full and there's no wait list?
No.
Okay. Have you had conversation with High Plains and Hayes about putting some mental health beds in an old hospital they have there?
It's personally not since we opened the the Camber KVC facility for kids. I don't think I've had another conversation with High Plains for adults since then. Deputy Secretary Brown may have, or somebody on the behavioral health side, but I haven't since that KVC facility opened.
So the new facility in Wichita is going to take quite a little time to get up and operational.
January 2027 is our target.
January 2027. So how many beds will that have?
We'll have 104 beds, 52 for acute adult inpatient care and treatment beds, and 52 for criminal defendants.
So it's not going to be enough beds to even alleviate to get these numbers in Larner down to where you have staffing for that. I mean, you're still going to be looking at traveling staff, it looks to me like.
At Larned, probably, yes.
Yeah. We got to figure that deal out. I mean, there's no way that the state can continue to pay, $60, $70 million or
Right.
59 million, whatever it is every year that for traveling. I mean, I would much sooner pay your staff more money
Me too.
and than paying travelers. And I don't know, have you done much thought on this, or you have any options for any of us?
I've given it a lot of thought, and the House has had a couple of hearings in the Appropriations Committee on contract staffing as an issue. They also had a hearing last week on a bill to make some changes in the state employee bonus program so that we could, we've got some proviso language to allow us to do some sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses above the $3,500 cap that's in place in statute that we're doing now this year. And they had a hearing on that bill that would put that into law, so it would expand to other agencies and let us continue. I think we've seen some positive movement, and we've talked to this committee as well about that, with those bonuses in place of recruiting more employees, and at Osawatomie in particular, encouraging some of the contract traveling nurses to come be state employees, because with the pay rates where they are, as the Secretary Prophet mentioned, with the help the legislature's provided and the bonuses, that pay difference is, they like the environment, they like where they're working, and they like what they're doing and who they're working around. And with the bonus and the enhanced pay rates, that's made a difference. But it's progress. It's 5 or 6 employees, and we need 40. So it's going to take some time to work on that. We've got other pipeline training programs in place, trying to get students on campus so they can see the environment, learn about the place. I think maybe encouraging some of that more directly with financial incentives would help as well. But it's a large number of people that we need to hire to fill the positions that we have, and just the number of people who are going into nursing or behavioral health as a clinical profession. We need to keep encouraging more people to do that work as well.
So right now you figure you have 40 openings? Is that what you said?
At Osawatomie, yes.
So how many at Larner?
I can look it up. It's in the 200 and 220 range, 210 to 220 nursing, LPN, or direct care positions.
That's a lot.
It is, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott, thank you for your presentation. This kind of follow-up to the chairman, always learn something new at this. So you have these people, you can't get in there right now. Do they stay at home, or are they in prison, or when I say prison, county jail? I just wonder where they're located at.
If they're individuals waiting for a competency evaluation or restoration treatment, they're typically waiting in a county jail, or they could be on bond and at home, but the vast majority are in county jails.
So the county pays for that, or do we pay the county for them being in the county jail?
We do have a program under Senate Bill 228 that where we can reimburse counties up to $100 a day for individuals that a county jail's holding, waiting for a bed at Larned or Osawatomie for competency treatment. And we've been, I think our totals, I haven't looked at it recently, so I don't want to speculate, but we have been paying, that program's been in place for a year and a half, maybe in our second year. And there are counties that some counties that have one person that racks up a bill is waiting for 100 days and they submit a reimbursement request to us for that. The larger counties, Wyandotte, Johnson, Shawnee, Douglas, Sedgwick, we have a pretty routine process to reimburse them for people that they're holding. But so we do at $100 a day, which isn't the full cost, but is a part of the cost. For a person who's waiting for one of the acute beds, typically they're waiting in a hospital. They could be waiting in a hospital. They could be waiting at home. Most typically, they're waiting in a hospital emergency department.
Senator Frag.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to the Larned issue, as we think through our problem, one of them's housing. You know, if we had everybody wanted to move to Larned today, they don't have enough housing. So somehow that's got to fit in the picture. I just wanted to add that.
We talked about that before. Yeah, absolutely.
Senator Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Scott, as much as I wish proviso language to say we're not going to use traveling nurses anymore would be the solution. I wish it was that easy. We know that it's not. So with that in mind, if hypothetically we're paying $60 million a year for traveling nurses, if we were to go back and, let's say hypothetically, I'm throwing out numbers, raise the rate of every nurse that we have on staff by $15 an hour, one, would that solve your nursing shortage? And two, would that cost less than $60 million? I know I'm asking you a lot of questions.
No, there just really two. To the second one, I think with our current staffing and filling a reasonable number of our vacant positions, adding $15 to a nursing pay would be less than the $60 million we're spending on contract labor. I think I can pretty safely say that without doing the math. Would it help? I think we've had the House Appropriations Committee and Appropriations Chair asked the similar question, how much would it take? And we've been kicking around numbers of $50 to $55 to $60 an hour, where the starting pay rate for our registered nurses right out of school is right at about $40 an hour. So that is in that $15 an hour range. We think at Osawatomie would probably make a difference. It would draw people not just from Johnson County, but from further south up. Larned, I don't know. It would help with some, but again, we're going to run into housing. We're going to run into there just aren't enough registered nurses. It might create some mechanisms where people who are developmental disability techs might see that pay range out there and want to train to go to nursing school. And if we could help them with that, kind of grow our own. But Osawatomie, I think it would make a difference given the numbers that we've been talking about in the discussions with other staff. Larned, it certainly wouldn't hurt, but I don't know that it's a guarantee. I wouldn't be able to give you a guarantee about that.
No, and I'm not necessarily asking for guarantees. I'm just getting to the basic economics of the problem. Right? If you're paying people enough, they'll come. That's just how it works. And Larned, I think part of that solution is Sedgwick County, or it is the South Central Kansas facility, because so many of their patients do go out there. And that would hopefully relieve some of, it's not going to solve the problem, but relieve some of that burden off of Larned and the need for the additional staff out there. And so, I don't know, I think that when it comes to this problem, it's going to be one that we kind of spend a lot of money in the short term, but we have got to set ourselves on a trajectory to end this traveling nurse shortage. And I think the only way to do that is by increasing pay and incentivizing people to come work at our state hospitals. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Scott. Appreciate you being here today. Committee, I would also point out you have numerous written statements in your packet. I mean, there's a pretty good pile. So I think there's a lot of people interested in what goes on here. So.
Dayton was going to go over the state hospitals briefly.
Okay, Dayton, you're going to go over the state hospitals, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. I'll go over the enhancements, so it should be rather brief.
Pardon me?
I'll go over the enhancements, so it should be briefer. If you'll turn to page 365 of that same volume of the budget summary, you should see Kansas Neurological Institute there at the top of that page. And that was 365. And I'll begin on 366, which is the fiscal year 2025 analysis. The agency had one enhancement request for certified medication aid positions. The agency requested 21 FTE positions and $1.2 million. The stated reason was that KNI was cited by surveyors from KDHE for failing to ensure an appropriately organized staffing structure to ensure that the CMAs are properly supervised. A medication administration study was administered, and it determined it took 20 minutes to pass the medication, so that's how they arrived at the amount and the FTE. The House did not recommend funding this, nor did the governor. And that is the only item for 25, so I'll continue on to 26, which is on page 369. You'll see item 1, certified medication aids, that would continue that request from fiscal year 2025. Again, the House did not recommend funding this position. The governor did recommend funding that at $389,000. And on your yellow sheet, that is item 1 under Kansas Neurological Institute. The second enhancement request is for cook FTE positions. The agency requests 21 FTE positions and $1 million. The agency does not currently have a specific dietary department, which closed in 1996. And again, the stated reason is related to that plan of correction. The House did not recommend funding this. The governor recommended funding this at $898,000, which is item 2 on the yellow sheet. And I'll stand for questions on K and I.
On that first one, you said how much did the governor recommend?
The certified medication aid, $389,000, and that would be about 7 of the 21 requested positions.
Questions? Seeing none?
All right, then if we will turn to page 373, which should be the next agency in your binders, you'll see Larned State Hospital. On page 374, the fiscal 2025 analysis begins. First, I'll note the State General Fund reappropriations were lapsed by the Legislative Budget Committee. Those were restored by the House. Both of those lapses were restored. And turning to page 375, the first enhancement request was related to fire services. The revised estimate included a request of $275,000 SGF to fund a contract for fire services with the city of Larned. Previously, the Larned State Hospital had been providing those services to the hospital as well as the KDOC campus. However, the agency has entered into an agreement with the city of Larned to provide those due to the agency's stated struggle to maintain necessary training and equipment to provide those services. The House did not add funding for this item. The governor did add funding for the item. Item 4, the revised estimate includes a request of $2.4 million State General Fund and 1 FTE position for a state security program competency unit. The bulk of the funding would be for contract staff to fund that unit, as well as funding for the 1 FTE position. The House and the governor did not recommend funding this item. Item 5 is the nursing staff. There's already been discussion about that. I would just note that the request was for $2.7 million. The House added $30 million. And in adding the $30 million, they also restored the reappropriations with the stated intention that they could use the reappropriations to cover the gap there. And then turning to page 377, which is 2026, item 1. would continue the agreement for fire services. However, you will note that the funding for 26 and moving forward would be 75,000 for the ongoing obligation. And that's contrasted with the 275 for that initial year's cost. This was not recommended by the House and was recommended by the governor. Item 2 is for the State Security Program Competence Unit, again, continuing that request from the fiscal year 25 budget. However, this would be $4.8 million for a full year's cost, and this item was not recommended by the House or the governor. And then item 3 is for agency nursing staff. The House did not fund this item, and the governor funded it in the full amount, or recommended funding it in the full amount, I should say. And I'd stand for questions on Larned. On your green sheet, on page 16, this has already been discussed, but the House did add language for fiscal year 2027 that would prohibit Larned from using contract staff beginning in fiscal year 27. And now I'd stand for questions on Larned.
You said on page 16 for 27?
Yes, it's the second item there at the top of page 16.
Okay, I
Agency
found it.
nursing staff language.
Yep. Other questions? Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go right back to that to make sure I had that correct. So the language says that contract staff, nursing staff can't be hired, but then also that budget was not increased from point number 3. Did I get that right?
Mr. Chair, Senator, so I'll talk about each year to sort of set the, so for fiscal year 25, the House did add funding, $30 million, plus restoring the reappropriations. For 26, the agency requested 32.7 million, and the House did not add funding for 26. And then for 27, the agency has not submitted a budget for 27 yet, but House appropriations added language that will prohibit them from using the contract staff in 27. So that's kind of separate from the money adds.
Okay. But we have prohibitive language for 2027.
That's
sitting
correct.
there essentially.
Yes,
No
that's
matter what happens in terms of the budget numbers. Okay, thank you.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on the funding for the nursing staff, the House, theirs was in 25, theirs was 30 million and reappropriations. And did the governor concurred with the agency with that, is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, those are both correct.
And then in 26, the House did not put any funding in, and the governor said it should be there.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, the House did not add funding for 26, and the governor funded the agency's request in her recommendation.
Thank you.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question may not be for you, but I'll ask it to you, and when you can find out, we can see who will answer it. Is the problem that we can't get the nursing staff out there a location problem, or is it a pay problem?
Mr. Chair, Senator, I will defer that to the agency. I do have one more hospital before they come up, but yes.
Well, yeah. Go ahead, Dayton. And can you wait on the question? Okay, Dayton, go ahead.
Okay, then we'll turn to page 382, which should be the next budget in your binder. Should see Osawatomie State Hospital. And for 2025, the agency had one, that's on page 383. The agency had one supplemental request, which was for agency nursing staff. That request was $11 million. The House funded that at $8 million. The governor recommended funding it at $11 million. And then turning to page 386, for fiscal year 2026, The first enhancement request again was $11 million for the contract nursing staff, which the House did fund at $8 million. And the governor recommended funding at the full $11 million requested. The other item is a request for psychologist positions, 253,000, and 2 FTE positions to employ additional psychologists on the Osawatomie campus. That was funded by both the House, and the governor did recommend funding that item. So you'll see all three of those items on page 16 of your green sheet. The $8 million for nursing staff as well as the psychologist positions. And before I stand for questions, the next budget is Parsons State Hospital. However, there were no enhancement requests or changes by the House. That would be the next budget in your document, and I'm happy to stand for questions now or after the meeting.
Questions for Dayton? Thank you, Dayton. I think we got everything. Thank you. And your question was for?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for the question. I mean, I think the short answer to the question is it's a bit of both. I mean, in the sense of it certainly is a rate of pay issue, but I think exacerbated at Larned with the location issue. And I think as this committee's already talked about, there's other factors at play, unavailability of housing and things like that. I mean, so it's a larger context in that sense. I'm old, so I've been around a while. I was around when the legislature passed the legislation that created the sexual predator treatment program to create that program for involuntary commitment, in the late 90s, So, absent that program, we would have the 94 beds for psychiatric services, the 150 or 170 beds for the criminal restoration, the forensics bed. But I think that when that legislation passed, I think no one would have anticipated that we would get to a number of 350 people, on that campus when that program was established there in that statute. So again, I mean, the short answer to your question is I think both. I do think increased pay would certainly make a significant difference, and the legislature's been very generous in adding pay, but I do think additional pay would help to recruit. But I think there would also need to be additional efforts in partnership with locals, economic development, and others to how to address some of the other issues like around housing.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might be for Scott. Scott, I was wondering when you have the hospital and you don't have it filled up and you got people in prison, what's the average stay for a person in the mental hospital? I mean, when they go in, how long are they there? Are they there forever, or is it 6 months? Just wondering if you give me a 80-mile-an-hour idea.
So on the acute, Scott Brenner, Deputy Secretary for Hospitals, on the acute side, our average length of stay is around 14 days at Osawatomie and a little longer than that, 18 to 20 days at Larned is the average stay for an acute care and treatment placement. On the competency side, the average length, I probably have the number here somewhere, but it's higher than that. It's in the over 100, probably closer to 180 days.
So do they?
On average.
What's the chances of them coming back? They come to you for 14 days, and is there quite a bit of return on that?
Our readmission rate is not as high as you would think. And I'm looking at my report from January at Larned. They had seven patients that they admitted 34 over the course of the month, and only 7 of them were 30-day readmissions. So they'd been a patient within the last 30 days. So that's not very high for a mental health hospital. Do people repeat cycles longer than 30 days of readmissions? That they do.
One final question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So you got the guy sitting in the county jail, and he's been there for a while. That's probably absolutely not healthy for him, but number 2, is it harder to work with him once he gets to the hospital, or just wondered if that just compounds a problem when we didn't focus on the need at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'm not a clinician. What's described to me as the issue more often is the repeated cycling of stages of competency. So the defendant, when he's in jail and goes to court and the judge says, I don't think this person's competent to stand trial, I need to have that evaluated. That gets done, they find maybe he's not competent, and we start treatment. We get that completed in the course of 90 days or so, but they don't come up for another court date for another month. Over the course of that time, they decompensate, lose competency, and then the cycle starts all over again. A lot of what we're doing at Larned No Sawatomie in terms of restoring somebody to competency, and there's treatment and therapy that happens, but we're also putting people on medication in a pretty structured environment, and that doesn't always happen in jails. The kinds of medications that we use, not that jails couldn't use them, but it does require some medical monitoring and things that there are some jails that aren't comfortable doing that. Sometimes people don't want to take the medications or don't want to cooperate, and that becomes more of a complicating factor. But so once we can get people to Larned, we can have pretty good success getting them stabilized, restoring them to competency if that's even a possibility, and then back into the criminal process. But there's a lot of time delays on the judicial side that sometimes doesn't help that continuation of treatment and getting people to the next phase. I'm sorry I didn't have better numbers for that. That'd give you a flavor of what happens.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you a lot, Scott. Appreciate you being here today. Committee, one thing I'd like to point out is as we get going the rest of this week, if you have provisos, please get those into staff so you can get those prepared. So when we start working the agencies, if you have provisos for adding funding or taking funding out or language or whatever you might have. So any questions on that? Okay. Senator Erickson, one little cleanup work. If you folks want your names put on your books, just leave them set at your desk and they'll put your names on these books so you won't be, you'll know which ones are which. Yeah. Senator Fagg's ahead of us all. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a request. I would like a list of all of the education K-12 funding that is outside of the education budget in other agency budgets, if I could get that for education budget purposes. Thank you.
They're working on it. Okay. Any other questions or business? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all.